and welcome to our last interview in our International Women's Day celebration. This month, we chose to celebrate the accomplishments of women with interviews and candid conversations with women in unique careers. My name is Jennifer Paquette, and I'm the Adult and Teen Services Coordinator here at the Midland Public Library, and I'll be your host for this event. We'd like to get started with a land acknowledgement. Midland Public Library acknowledges and is thankful for the opportunity to work on the traditional territory of the Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Anishinaabe, which includes the Chippewa, Ojibwa, Potawatomi, and Odawa people. We especially acknowledge the Chippewa of Bosley First Nation and Rama First Nation, who were the stewards of the lands in and around Midland. We also recognize the Métis nationhood currently represented in our community by the Georgian Bay Métis Council. We recognize and deeply respect their ongoing and historic connection to these lands. These connections need to be clearly and overtly articulated as part of the collective agreement to make the promise and challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our community. We're honored to be hosting Lisa Bertram as our last guest in this series. Lisa's post-secondary education consisted of a co-op program in civil technology at Georgian College, followed by a 2-year top-up to complete her engineering degree at Lakehead University. A number of years later, while working, Lisa decided to add more business knowledge by completing an MBA through Liverpool University. This rounded education gave her hands-on experiential learning in both engineering and business while applying the teachings to her business. Lisa joined Bertram Construction 28 years ago and worked up the company doing all jobs from estimating to project management to overall management, and is now the president of Bertram Construction. Bertram Construction is a third-generation, 87-year-old business in industrial, commercial, institutional, and multi-unit residential construction serving Simcoe County and surrounding areas. For the past 10 years, Lisa has been the president of Bertram Construction and is one of the region's largest builders. She employs 35 people locally. Bertram Construction has won the Best Medium-Sized Business in Barrie in 2019. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming Lisa Bertram. Lisa, thanks so much for being here this evening. It was really a pleasure that you could be a part of our International Women's Day celebration and share your journey with us.
Well, thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Excellent.
Actually, I can add to the awards if that's all right, because
yes, please do.
Last week we just took home Best Company in Barrie for manufacturing, engineering, and construction. So we just got another award. So that was just wonderful news last week.
Congratulations. That's fantastic. It must be really rewarding to see your work recognized in that kind of a way.
Absolutely. You know, it's not something that we necessarily seek out. And a lot of times I've probably been a little shy about it, or I'm not actually shy, but it's easy to just not seek gratification or gratitude and acknowledgement. And sometimes it's like, yeah, okay, whatever. But the reality is we work really hard, and it's not necessarily about me getting the award. It's around our acknowledging the work that our people do as well. Mm-hmm. And there isn't a lot of women in construction. So if we're acknowledged, not necessarily just because we're women, but because we're one of the better construction companies out there, it puts forth all women in business.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Yeah. That's fantastic. So as a great segue, let's jump right in. As owner, director, and president of Bertram Construction, what does a typical day look like for you? And can you dip your toes in a little bit of what your roles and responsibilities are like?
Oh, yeah, for sure. A typical day for me, and I'm sorry, something just jumped off my screen. There we go. You're back.
Oh, sorry. No.
A typical day for me. I spend a lot of time in meetings, but my meetings are constantly varying. You know, I've almost thought that it's this job, that construction in general and the job that I do is probably perfect for somebody with attention deficit disorder or something like that, because we never do the same thing twice. And especially as project managers and now owner, you can often pick your own schedule, not necessarily within the workday. Like the workday tends to be, 8 to 5 or something like that, or 7 to 7 or 8 or whatever at times. But you've got so much work to get done, and you get it done as you see fit. So it's around meetings and around different things. So a perfect day for me, and not a perfect, a typical day for me would be, often I meet with the manager of construction almost daily. And so he's one of my managers that work under me at least multiple times a week, 3-4 times a week. I meet with the manager of pre-construction. So the pre-construction side of things looks after sales, tendering, estimating until it becomes a job. And the construction side of things looks after all the projects. And then there's other people under them looking after the actual projects. I also have a meeting pretty much every day with finance to make sure money's flowing in and out. A number of times a week, I have site visits. So I actually get to go out to the job sites, put on my work boots and hard hat and tour around the sites and or talk to any of my site guys as well. Mixed in with that, lots of email. Not too much report writing or anything like that nowadays, probably a little bit more reading than writing, but that would be about it. So it's very varying, if I can put those two words together. And it's a nice balance because it's a mix of meetings with people, your team mainly, or our team. Sometimes ownership, like the ownership group or the engineers. A lot of times it's problem solving, but it's often diverse and different things coming at me simultaneously. I get a little involved in a little bit of the HR side of things as well. Get to hire and the odd time let go, but that's not very often. But it's just changing and varying and getting to call on experience and teaching the next gen all the way up through as to either what we believe in or how we do things, but at the same time, how would you solve a problem? Bring back a couple ideas and then get to hear often ideas. And sometimes it's my ideas that fly, but oftentimes it's the people that work for me, the idea that flies. So it's changing, constantly changing.
And I'm sure that you're almost never bored.
No, I can't. I probably couldn't have. I mean, I think we'll probably talk about this a little later, but I'm fortunate because I'm a third generation family business owner and a family business member. And oftentimes in family businesses, you end up in areas that you don't necessarily want to be. And I am so fortunate because I ended up in a career that it couldn't be better suited for me. And it keeps my interest.
That's key. I think it's one of those things that they say, love what you do and you'll never work a day in your life.
That is so true. You've got to look for something that you just love.
You segued right into my next question. Was this something that you always wanted to do?
I think, from a young age, probably not, but from, and I'm talking a young age in the sense of public school. So, if I think at public school, I wanted to be a professional basketball player. So the bottom line is I'm 5'5" and I will never be a professional basketball player. So maybe it's one of the first things that I wanted to do that was probably realistic for my life. And I couldn't hold a tune, so I couldn't be a singer, those types of things. But as far as a first kind of career path, I think initially I showed interest in engineering and or architecture. And because our family business was in the building side of things, I went down the road of the engineering and with a flair to construction. And then I had the opportunity to work in the family business as a teenager, a little bit, and then just touched on the construction side of things. I also worked on the retail side of things when we had retail hardware stores and stuff. But the construction was definitely a calling for me. And then I was fortunate enough, I think we'll get into that a little later, but to gain some experience outside of the company with high-rise construction and knew I loved it. I absolutely knew construction was where I wanted to be. And I was young. I was like maybe first year college or something like that. It just affirmed that I was down the right path.
Did you find that your family responded really well to the fact that you had such a passion for construction and for being able to continue on with the family business like this?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. My grandfather was so proud. My dad was beside himself, excited that I would enter into the family business. And I think because like on my side of the family, there was 3 daughters, and I'm tied for the oldest. I'm a twin. So I don't think they had given consideration that one of us would go into the family business until I had showed an aptitude for engineering and at a young age expressed an interest. And then it was like, you know, cheering me on. When are you going to get your engineering degree? You're coming to work for us, that type of thing. So it was just, he was so happy. And as I progressed along in my career and, you know, started to ultimately build the business up even more, I think my dad couldn't have been prouder. So, and then I'm also fortunate enough to work, my business partner presently is my uncle. He's retired now, but, you know, they were the brothers of the second generation that had the company. And they both are so proud that it's gone on to a third generation and to me.
That's excellent. I would imagine that's when you're building a family business from the beginning, you know, not necessarily maybe not a worry, but so definitely consideration is, does the next generation want to continue this on, or do they want to follow a path of their own? So that's great to hear that it's had such an outcome and such an impact in your career and in your family. Let's talk a little bit about your training. It's quite impressive, and you have that MBA as well as you're a professional engineer. And we touched on a little bit in the bio, but so you did the MBA while you were working. So why add on that piece?
You know, it was interesting. I mean, I've been in the business now for 28 years, and I think I finished my MBA 10 or maybe even 12 years ago. So I probably would have started it about 15 years ago. And at that point, I was, you know, 10, 13 years into my career. I wasn't the president at the time, but I was getting up higher, and I was definitely doing a lot to run the company. And I started to realize as I was in different meetings with accountants, with lawyers, with all different people, that they would ask them all the people that touch a business's life. Like, so if you think about it, in our business, there's insurance, there's our legal, like our external to the company, but there's our insurers, there's bonding company in our business, there's our lawyers, and there's our accountants, and there's bankers. So there's kind of 5 elements that are external forces that I won't say you report to, but in some ways you have to report to them, even even financially and such. But you can also gain a lot by listening to them. However, there'd be different scenarios or different business, I guess, maybe problems, different things that would come up along the way. And I would ask questions, and I would get the right answers back to the questions I asked. But it took me quite a while to realize that afterwards, and looking back on it, they didn't answer the question that I really needed to ask, but they did answer the question that I was asking. And what I started to realize was I didn't even know what questions to ask, because you don't know what you don't know. And I decided that I always had thought I might do my master's, but I figured I would do it in engineering or something to do with construction. And what I realized is, as much as I love construction and I love building, I'm already very good at that. What I don't know a lot about is business. And gaining an MBA while working in a company, so you can start to understand a bigger picture period of business, so you can speak better to the insurers, the bonding company, the bank, and understand those elements. You might not need to know all of it, but understand enough such that you actually have an idea of even the right questions to ask, can give you a bigger picture overall. And fortunately for me, when I decided to do my MBA, they were just getting going with the ENBAs, the electronic ones, which is now, of course, everything's on the internet. But they were just starting with that. And I found one through Liverpool in England that would actually allow me to do one course at a time. And then I could take a little bit of a leave from it and apply it to the business. And so I did courses, I think they were 6 or 8 weeks at a time. And then I would take 2 to 4 weeks off and actually implement it, and then start my next one. And if I needed a little longer, I'd take a little longer off. So it could take me a little longer to get through, but it was one of the best ways to improve my own business internally.
Mm-hmm. You had this ready-made example to be able to execute everything that it was that you were learning.
Right. And I was able to work on my business through the MBA and then implement it. It was fantastic.
Mm-hmm. That's excellent. You touched on it a little bit earlier, but let's talk a little bit about your career path to director and president, and sort of where you started out of your training.
Sure. Because I went to Georgian College to start with, it was a co-op program. And so there was 3 co-op terms throughout the program. I think 2 4 months and 8 months, or it might have been 1 4 months, 2 8 months. I don't remember back then, but I had already been working a little bit with our construction company prior to starting that program. And so I made the determination that I would take the co-op experiences and I would get external experience. I don't even know why I made that decision initially, because I don't recall it being prompting from my father or my uncle, because I could have easily worked in the company. But I think I just decided to see what else was out there. And I was able to work for a company in Toronto doing high-rise construction. And I actually worked on site doing what they call layout. It's similar to surveying, but it's instead of just surveying out the property line, it's actually, I did an 18-story and a 14-story building, of which we brought up the elevation and did all the layouts for all the walls, the condos throughout the whole building, and the parking lot and curved parking structures and everything. But it gave me some amazing experience. Specifically, there was probably over 200 workers on the site. I was the only female. I was the only woman on the site. The coffee truck driver and I, and that was it. But it was an Italian forming company. There was not a lot of English spoken, like there was on the management side of the site, but not through the forming company. But it was absolutely amazing experience. I guess I probably toughened up a little bit, but at the same time, just gained such overall experience and depth of knowledge of applying what I was learning in school. And I remember at times, we were trying to do some layout, and I was working under another fellow, and he didn't know how to do the layout, and I knew how to do the math for it. And so I, showed him, and he was like, "Where on earth did you learn that?" But I learned it in college, and it was this tricky layout that was being done. But he's like, from that point forward, when I was able to take the lead and show them why I was right for something, it was such respect that was gained. And I remember, I still have the hard hat they wrote Lisa, which is Leeza, which is how they pronounced my name at the time. But, it was a fun experience and probably one of the best things for my overall career. And the interesting thing was, it was probably 20 years later, we were building a building ourselves that was similar in nature. And I was one of the only people that had ever worked on something similar. And I was able to bring in some of the stuff that I remembered from 20 years earlier and apply it for our own company, because we had never done high-rise construction. So anyways, going back, I was able to work with the high-rise construction. I worked on a number of different projects for that firm. And then I also worked at a concrete testing and inspection company, which was only a 4 or 6 month placement. But the knowledge that I picked up there was great knowledge for me to understand results and stuff later, and be able to discuss, weird results or understand the implications of testing and such. And then ultimately, after college, I did join the construction company, but only for about 6 or 8 months. I did some specialty projects before I went off and did my engineering degree upgrade for 2 years. And while I was up at Lakehead, I actually worked for a professor doing modeling and such at the university. And it was after all that I actually started full time with Bertram Construction. And I started at the bottom, but it's at the bottom in the office. I started in helping out the estimator, doing basic estimating, basic junior project management stuff. And then eventually estimating my own jobs, and then having to run the jobs as project manager. Ultimately, from there, managing the company, and then going on to become the president and running things. And that was a very quick 28-year history.
Well, and it sounds like it was a bit like compound interest, that all of your experiences is just building on one another to uniquely position you in your role here as president, that you were able to really grasp all these different levels of the business it is that you run. So I think
absolutely, it's some of the experiences that we gain over the years that are, at the time might be a lesson learned or something like that, something we do wrong. It's oftentimes the things that we do wrong that we learn the biggest lessons, that years later, whether it's ourselves or somebody that's working for us, that we can say, that might work, and you might want to try something different, based on your own lessons learned. So compounding it is a good way to put it.
Yeah. So you touched on it a little bit when you were talking about working with the 200 men crew in Toronto, but construction is very male dominated field, and you've worked on everything from the management side and as president and down to field work. Can you speak to what the male dominance of the construction field has meant for your career and how it may have been an obstacle for you?
Sure. Funny, it wasn't as much of an obstacle for me as what you would think. And I think that's because I had a couple things going for me. One is, I guess initially when I think back to the 20 years ago or 20 some odd years ago when I was working in the high-rise construction, it was so foreign then, they didn't even know what to think of me. But because I was doing layout, I was part of the management team, so I had a white hard hat on. And so, everyone on site, when somebody shows up with a white hard hat, that means they're one of the bosses, or at least they have to take some direction. Mm-hmm. And so the color of the hard hat helped. And then eventually when I started working for Bertram Construction, having had that field experience outside of the company, and so some knowledge of what's going on in the field helped me immensely. And let's not kid ourselves. Having the last name Bertram when working for Bertram Construction helped me immensely as well. Mm-hmm. And I'm an engineer. And so showing up on site, I think by the time I got to Bertram Construction and was working with them, they were a little more accustomed to seeing women, but most of the people in the field they're only accustomed to seeing women that are engineers or architects, again, coming in from the design side of things. And so I was definitely new coming in from the construction side of things, but they definitely saw me as management, which is true, because when you come in from the office, you do tend to come in from a management side. Mm-hmm. But it definitely impressed them when I came in with knowledge, both from a schooling perspective and from the experience in high-rise construction perspective.
Do you see it changing? Has it changed since?
Oh yeah, for sure. It's definitely, the numbers are really too low. Mm-hmm. They're still really too low. When I went through engineering, I think there was 7% women going through it. Mm-hmm. Today, I think it's something more like 30. So it's gotten, it's not 50-50. It's not where I think it should be. Mm-hmm. But it's a huge improvement. We have 35 people in our company, five are women. Mm-hmm. So 1 in 7, that's still, numbers are pretty low. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, in the field right now, like actually working in the field as a carpenter or a laborer or a superintendent, 0. Mm-hmm. All 5 are in the office, whether it's in the management, project management side of things or accounting. I would love to have more women or some women working in the field, mm-hmm. but they're hard to find. Mm-hmm. It's really hard to find. It is a priority for me to hire a female in the field for a carpenter or laborer, because, and I'm flexible as to either, because we'll build up from internal. Like if it's the right person, we'll teach them. we'll give them an apprenticeship, we'll bring them on. We don't have to have it hired already into the apprenticeship side of things. Mm-hmm. But I would love to hire a female superintendent. Can't find it. Mm-hmm. And that takes time, because one of the only ways to become a superintendent is to work in the field a number of years. And so, like, typically you're 10 or 15 years in the field before you become a superintendent. And there's not a lot of women that have been in the field for 10 or 15 years. So that makes sense, mm-hmm. but it's hard to find. Yeah. But it is getting better. I am seeing more and more women. I've seen women that are masons. I've seen a lot of electricians, some HVAC workers. Like, we're seeing it more and more, a lot of painters. And it's actually, most job sites I go at some point, especially if I've got a job site with a lot of workers on it, we're going to see over the course of the job site at least 1 or 2 women working. But unfortunately, not for me right now, and I'm looking for that.
Well, here's hoping that series like this will help increase that visibility of women in these kinds of positions, that encourages young women to consider careers in STEM more often than they might right now. Mm-hmm. Can you share an interesting story about something that's happened to you since you started? It could be an interesting project you worked on, or media coverage, or an award.
You know, one of the neatest projects that we built was the McLaren Arts Center in Barrie. Mm-hmm. And it's an old Carnegie building. And the Carnegie buildings were built all over the province, and they were absolutely identical. And they were the libraries, Carnegie libraries. I'm not sure if you realize that, but anyways, we took the old Carnegie library and we took an addition that was on it, off of it, and demolished it, not the library, but we sustained the whole original Carnegie library exterior. But then there was main supporting columns. We temporary braced everything, put huge beams in through with cranes and such. And it was a real kind of head scratcher as to how to build it, as well as some of the finest details I've ever seen. And still, it was over 10 years ago we finished it. Still have we ever seen as far as finishes and such goes, with a very finicky architect, C.M. Macareri. I'll always remember that man's name. But he's actually gone on to be one of the world's finest and most decorated architects. So it's actually kind of a feather in our cap, so to speak, about how we've built one of the highest award-winning buildings in this area from one of the most award-winning architects in Canada. And he's an international award-winning architect now. It was tough. It was one of the hardest projects I've ever done. And it actually, from the time that I finished that project, I kind of remember thinking, now what? And that was, well, I think it was, I don't even remember what year it was. So there you go. 2001. So it was a long time ago. It was 20 years ago now. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, I'm pretty young in my career for now what? But then I just went on to managing a lot of projects instead of a single project and such. But it was a lot of grit and determination to get through it. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing, even back then, that team that built the McLaren Arts Center was me running the construction company, Joan Lehman, who ran as a representative for the McLaren, ran the owner side of things, and a woman, Sarah Tetlow. She passed away a few years ago, but she was the architect. So it was 3 women building the McLaren Arts Center. And I haven't seen that again until a couple of years ago when we did Operation Grow. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah. I was going to say Operation Grow was a woman field team of women. And
then last year when we built Greenhaven Women's Shelter, it was a team of women as well. And so it was kind of neat to see, you know, the first time was, like I said, 20 years ago, and now it's becoming more prevalent, and it's lovely to see.
Mm. Well, the McLaren Art Center is a great feather to have in your cap. It's a beautiful building, and I never drew the connection between the Carnegie Library, because we have one here in Midland. But now that you say that, I can see the similarities between the old part and the library building here in Midland, which is not where the library is housed, but it's it's here in the downtown core. And the McLaren Art Center is really, really well done. It's beautiful space, and it fits so well with that with that downtown, with the where it is. So
thank you.
That's a great job. You did a great job. Do you have an interesting or little known fact about construction, contracting, design, or building that you can share with the audience? Maybe it's something that we wouldn't necessarily consider. Some insider knowledge, I guess. Could be maybe the way that weather affects your projects, or any.
Okay, yeah. Actually, I'll talk about weather. You know, people think construction, they think it's seasonal. Mm-hmm. Do you think it's seasonal?
I would have, yes.
And I think that comes from road construction, because road construction is seasonal. Like, you cannot put roads down for the most part. Like, even you think about the downtown core, you know, well, that wasn't all that seasonal because they did work through the winter, didn't they? There's certain things you can't do in the winter, such as paving. You can't do landscaping, you can't do paving. But we go all year round, always. We have to plan a little bit around half load season, which we're in right now. It's just if we need stuff trucked to and from a site, we have to do it either before or wait till after half load or stock up. But we go 5 days a week. We go 12 months a year, steady. I don't recall the last time we laid anyone off for winter construction. We just don't. You layer up, you dress for the weather, we allow for weather days, but construction has become one of the most consistent employers there is. And if you think about it from an employee standpoint, there's overtime available some of the time, but in general, it's a job that runs 7 to 5 or 8 to 5, or actually a 7 to 4 or 8 to 5 Monday to Friday. And so it's a job that you're not expected to be working, you know, through the night. It's not a job that you're expected to work on the weekends. And it's one of the better paying jobs that you can actually even consider nowadays. So.
Well, I know.
Think about it, and a lot of people don't, because they still think seasonal, and they're so wrong.
Hearing you say that, you know, I've always thought that if I were to take a second career, I'd want it to be in something like carpentry, because for those reasons that you mentioned, I'm definitely a morning person. So being able to have a stable schedule like that, and also the ability to come to a project and be able to transform it, I think is a really gratifying thing. When you're working in office administration or in the office side of things, yes, on a grand scheme, you kind of get to see that. But I think from the grassroots level, carpentry, to be like, this was just a pile of whatever when I got here, and now it's whatever it is.
Yeah, there's always a real sense of accomplishment when you can turn something. You can turn something from a green field or an old dilapidated building or whatever, and then turn it into something, well, like the McLaren Arts Center. Like, you know, it takes a lot of time, and there's a lot of pieces to the whole thing. But, you know, when you can drive down the road and go, I know that project, and you know it from the inside out, and it's just a sense of fulfillment to know that you can build something from the ground up or fix something. It's a great career. I'm honored to be a part of it. I really am.
I'll ask you a question that came to us when our first interview with Carol Boucher, and she had said, we sort of discussed the way that architects and folks like in engineering and construction have their work out there for the public to enjoy on a regular basis. It's always on public display, and how it's a bit of an interesting and can be a bit of a vulnerable position. But she mentioned in our interview about how when she goes back on site to a project, it's kind of like one of those Much Music pop-up videos where she sees all the different conversations that were had about the different areas. You know, oh, well, we had a discussion about these door handles, or we had a discussion about this. So when you go back into the McLaren Arts Center, do you reminisce about the various aspects of that project or discussions you may have had with the team?
Absolutely. You know, you do, and you kind of chuckle to yourself, because something at the time that was so very important is now just a detail. But at the same time, it's heartwarming to see a building used as it's intended. You know, it's you don't always get to go back into the building. like, it depends on the use of the building, right? Mm-hmm. But a public building such as the McLaren, or like I go to Operation Grow regularly and buy my lettuce, mm-hmm. Right? And it's really nice to see it being used. But the funny thing is when you're building it and throughout the project, you're intimate with it. You're intimate with the team that's building it, and with the project itself. But when you go back in later, often people, if you go to Operation Grow, for instance, and I go in and I buy my lettuce, I'm a customer buying lettuce. They don't realize that, behind those fridges are the plugs that are attached to here, and the wiring was messed up here, or what are we going to do about the refrigeration system? And I'm thinking, well, it's kind of hot in here. Why don't you put the cooling on, or whatever the case is, and I'm a customer. And oftentimes, unless you're there meeting the people that you met with originally building the building, there's no awareness of your intimacy with the building, mm-hmm. but it's still heartwarming to go back and to see it and such. Yeah. I remember, on one of the projects I went back to, they were staining windows, like the window frame. And this is a number of years ago. And I'm like, can I speak to your manager, please? and they're like, why? And then I called the manager aside and introduced myself. And I'm like, those windows are oiled windows. They're not stained. And you actually can't stain them. And the stain is just going to peel off them. You have to oil them. And then I gave them the product name and whatever. And they're kind of like, who are you? And I'm like, it was such a specialty product. And it was a simple thing. They literally had to just be oiled, like almost like a mineral oil. Mm-hmm. And they had contracted out to this painter to do whatever. And they were doing it 100% wrong, and it was going to fail. But they just didn't realize it.
Right. And I think about places like Operation Grow or the McLaren Art Center, that what an impact you've had on the lives of strangers. I mean, I can probably tell you the number of weddings I've attended, or my grandmother's 90th birthday was in the McLaren Art Center. Just like, that little unknown aspect of touching strangers' lives by just.
Wow, I didn't think about that before. I always think about it as the building, but not the events that happen at the building. So that's really cool.
Yeah, it's such important life events for so many people in the community. It's just it's interesting to think about. Can you share a story about a funny mistake that you made when you were first starting, and what lessons you may have learned from that?
Good question. The only thing that came to mind, I actually struggled with this question, but the only thing that had come to mind was actually before I was working in construction. I worked at a lumber yard, which is not a bad idea actually if you're interested in getting into construction. But even as that part-time summer job or whatever, because learning all the different materials helps you later down the road, and learning the lingo and such. So I worked at a lumber store, and I remember I was opening on the order desk, and I'm sitting officially with my pen and taking the order. And nowadays you'd be on the keyboard taking the order, and it's like, guy came in and it's like 12 2x4 8, 12 2x4 8. I want this lumber, and I want so many nails and two sky hooks. I said, and I had no idea what a sky hook is, and so I wrote down on the bill 2 sky hooks. And then later, the head of shipper came in and he said, can you point out where the sky hooks are? And I'm like, nope. And there was a whole group of them, and they laughed their butts off. But there is no such thing as a sky hook. And so sometimes when you get, it was one of those things where it was the brunt of a joke, so it was fine. But I kind of learned a bit of a lesson as well, in the sense of ask. Mm-hmm. I could have asked the order guy beside me to say, I have no idea what they're ordering here. What's a sky hook? And it would have stopped there instead of it escalating. Mm-hmm. It didn't matter. It was all in fun. Mm-hmm. But, don't be afraid to ask questions.
No, I think that's a great lesson to learn from something like that.
Yes.
Can you tell us about a career accomplishment that you're particularly proud of?
Oh.
I'm sure it'll be hard to choose one.
You know, probably just, I don't even know. There's been a few, but I would say, you know, being named Business of the Year a couple of years ago for Bertram Construction, that was quite honoring. And then more recently, the new award that we just took this past week with, you know, Industrial Manufacturing Engineering Construction Company of the Year as well. You know, I think some of the biggest accomplishments are not so much in the award, but it just speaks to the team that we built. And so much of what we've done is, I come from a family, a construction family, and I'm the third generation builder within the construction family. But the 35 families that we employ, and yes, it's people we employ, but they're all attached to a web of families. You know, making sure that they're good on a constant basis. And I mean, not everybody's always good. We know that. But doing the best that I can do for those families, I think is some of the biggest accomplishments we can make. And this past year has been such a test in that on every front. You know, when there was a year ago now, when we were uncertain as to whether we were going to be working or not working, and we were fortunate enough to be able to work mostly through it all. But being able to sit down and have individual conversations with all 35 family members, or like our employees, and I know, which turned into their families, about the fact that we were going to try to keep everything going. And we did. We didn't lay off throughout the whole period. And there's such a sense of, there's such a pressure at times, but at the same, there's a sense of fulfillment when we figured out a way to keep every family employed and keep at least one income coming in on those families, because a lot of those families lost one income, or there is only one, or single dads or single moms or whatever. I knew it was critical to figure it out. And unless they chose to a couple people did choose for medical reasons to take a leave, and they all came back, thankfully, and are still working. But there's a big accomplishment. So I kind of went full circle around awards, but you know what? The bigger thing is, I think, just looking after the employees. And one of the hardest things to do is keep good employees, retainment within a company. And our retainment, or our retention, I think is the proper word, is exceptionally high. And I think it's sometimes the decisions we make during the hard times that can help during the easy times of people saying, you know what, I think I'll stay. So
that's fantastic and really touching, especially considering this last year and how difficult it's been for so many. So I think that is a lovely accomplishment. What advice would you give to people looking to get a career in construction or contracting or engineering? Or, you know, you can break it down into your top 5 things if you want to, but just in a general sense, what's your advice for folks that are looking to start out?
You have to get some experience somewhere. So even if that means some volunteer work, or whether it's Habitat for Humanity, you can volunteer for them, for instance. There is often builds going on that you can volunteer for that are community-based. That is huge. Do a co-op program, because they're going to help you with gaining experience, and you need the experience to get the job. So it's one of those things where the one builds to the next. Don't be afraid to go to college for something, whether it's a co-op, and if you have the opportunity for co-op, absolutely do it. The same with an apprenticeship. If you can do a pre-apprenticeship program or an apprenticeship program, if you can get yourself signed up for one, it's a stepping stone to get into the career. And look for mentors. It's often hard to find, but there are people out there that if you're willing to listen and ask questions, they're willing to teach and learn, or teach you and give you some time. Mm-hmm. You got to balance that with, you can't take all their time because they've got businesses to run or such. At the same time, something my dad said early on in my career, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. You probably should do it proportionally, in the sense of listen twice as much as you speak. And it's, you learn a lot more by listening than you do by speaking. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is really simple, but if you make a mistake, admit it, and admit it quickly, and learn from it, and make sure you learn from it. But there's nothing, like, people expect mistakes to happen, but it's how we handle those mistakes. If we don't handle them by admitting they happen, if we try to cover them up, I think you're not going to go as far as if you learn from it and go further. Like, you will go way further, and your company will trust you. I don't know if I covered 5 or not, but that's what I got.
It's valuable. It's valuable and very excellent advice. Are you working on any really neat projects right now?
We're doing an 8-story, 93-unit apartment building in Barrie near Dunlop and Ann. So that's neat. It's huge concrete walls that are going up right now, probably about 25-foot concrete forms that are standing in the air, and it's coming up right now. We have a fire that took a metal chemical building down in the Schaumburg area last year, and so we had it pretty much, that was a concrete slab left, and had to do a bit of site cleanup, and then have rebuilt it, and it's got a steel structure and metal panels, and literally the panels come on, like, connect those, and just on the side, like, the sidings go up, and it looks like it goes from all in the ground foundations to a steel shell that's sitting there to an enclosed building in a minute amount of time. So people think, wow, how'd that happen so quickly? So, and we're doing, the 8-story building is a residential building. It's a multi-unit one, but we're doing a little bit of residential work here and there, just some infill work as well. So we've got different projects on the go right now. So some work at Georgian College, we seem to be consistently having one project going there at a time, and it's varying. Like, you get into some asbestos removal and classroom, and make a little pharmacy, and then specialty classrooms and stuff, and in and out in a few weeks. So it's fun.
Never a dull moment over at Bertram Construction, that's for sure.
That's true.
My last question for you, Lisa. I'm a librarian, so I've got to ask about what people are reading and books that they love. So can you tell us about a book that you love?
I'm actually, I would have said at one point in time, an avid reader. I probably don't have enough time in the day for doing the avid reading. I've gotten a little bit more into the audiobooks of late, because I can do multiple things at once. I listen to an audiobook. I walk a couple times a day, so I listen to an audiobook when I walk, and I listen to audiobooks when I'm driving, as long as I'm not expected to make phone calls. But Brené Brown, I'm a Brené Brown fan. Daring Greatly, I think it is probably one of the best books that a person could read, especially as they're starting to climb up a ladder within a corporation and such, because it always brings back humility. And I think it's one of the best things that we can have, is our humility, and show and demonstrate. And she is fantastic as far as an educator and a writer. I've read most of her books. Actually, I think probably all of her books, but that is one of my favorites.
That's an excellent.
And she's also great on TED Talks. So if you want to just even catch it shortly on TED Talks, if it's not your type of book to read, watch it on TED Talks.
That's an excellent suggestion. I co-sign that for sure. Well, Lisa, thanks for taking the time to speak with us this evening and be a part of our International Women's Day celebration. You mentioned earlier, you don't know what you don't know, and that's what this series is all about. And I really, your passion for learning and listening and collaborating is really resonated with me, and I'm sure with our audience. And it's great advice for anybody, regardless of their career path. So I want to thank you for sharing that with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it.
Good.
And you don't know what you don't know. So many young people think, okay, they know the careers that are out there. You can do a doctor, you can do a lawyer, you can do whatever, but there's so many really interesting career paths that nobody would ever think of. Like there's bonding specialists and insurance specialists. There's people that, that specialize in the concrete blocks, the concrete. Like you kind of go, what? And yet it is something that is absolutely needed and needed year round and recession proof as well. So it's there's so many different career choices out there, and doing it nowadays with YouTube and actually being able to research out some different things and actually see people in action, it's maybe a little bit easier, but at the same time, you got to know to look, and that makes it hard.
No,
so thank you again.
No, it's my pleasure. And thank you to you, the audience, for watching. If you've missed any of our interviews with these women in unique careers, you can catch the links to these video recordings on our website. All of these women have excellent insights into a variety of career fields, so please share widely, especially with the young people in your life. Thank you, and happy International Women's Day to everyone. That's it for this evening. Thank you so much.